Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, Strategic Treasurer kicks off a three-part podcast series on Fintech Analyst Reports, revealing the latest developments, trends, and solutions around new Treasury and finance technology. Listen in to Part 1 as Managing Partner Craig Jeffery explores Treasury and risk management systems. Today, we're kicking off a three-part podcast series covering Strategic Treasurer's Fintech Analyst Reports. This is Treasury's go-to source for insights into the latest developments, trends, and solutions around new Treasury and finance technology. On this first episode, we'll explore Treasury and risk management systems with Managing Partner Craig Jeffery. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thank you, Meredith. It's good to be here.
Craig, can you give us a brief overview of the analyst reports? What is the purpose of these reports and how are they put together?
Sure. The analyst reports were designed originally, and they continue to be used in this way for corporate practitioners, corporate users of technology. We found that many people in Treasury may have the experience of selecting and implementing technology once, maybe twice in a 30 or 40-year career. And so the data can be quickly outdated. There's also significant advances in technology, services, delivery methods, and networks that are used. And it's vital that this group stay apprised with current information about what's important and what's going on. And so this was the core and continuing reason for it. It's also used for the broader investor community because many of them are investing into the Treasury space, the Treasury technology space, and the broader group of services that the CFO needs. So it serves both those purposes. These reports are put together through interviews and sharing information, getting information from the different providers, either directly in the space or those broader ecosystem partners that provide some very specialized services. So it's a combination of interviews, data that they provide, and then we write the information. So there's a broader section explains what the tech is. So it helps people understand what's going on, what are the key points, talks about the rationale for the report, and we get into what are the problems and issues that this technology is solving, and then we explain the overall tech landscape and looking at some of the other issues depending on the report. And then there's the specialized pages per vendor in the space. So people can dive deeply in the different solution providers in that space. So it's a good way to introduce you to the topic and dive deep into it.
Excellent. What a great resource for the community. I know that Treasury management technology is or can be complex. What are the key areas to help Treasury practitioners navigate solutions that help meet their needs, improve their workflow, and enhance Treasury operations?
Yeah, so the broader landscape, covers all of the tech that would fall under Treasury. So there's a range of services from FX trading platforms to Treasury management, Treasury risk management systems, which is the focus of this podcast. And it covers a range of elements around the cash conversion cycle, supply chain finance, connectivity, et cetera. So I think there's an aspect where each of these reports focuses on a major sector of what's a key driver. That's a good way to look at where this fits in the overall landscape. But each of these areas, each of these systems has a workflow aspect to that help you address your needs, whether it's around visibility to our cash, our forecast, our future cash flows, visibility to our exposures in the case of Treasury management system, for example, or it could be related to how do I connect to an increasingly complex world of more and more banks and more countries dealing with more currencies? I need to see it all. And I also have to handle new payment types. So the Treasury Aggregator report is a good one to look at those aspects there where have payment hub functionality and broader connectivity, whether it's to a network or directly to a bank. So this series of analyst reports is a good place to start. And we also have a number of webinars where we talk about the broader landscape of Treasury technology and how it addresses different sets of needs and what's changing in that space.
What are today's challenges and how can a treasury management system help? I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So what are the today's challenges in finance more broadly, with treasury specifically? I think those are good areas to look at. And so we've long thought, or for more than 5 years, thought about flexibility, insight, visibility, efficiency, and control are some of the key drivers that treasury groups and treasurers want to achieve. And so the challenges they have is you have to see those things. You have to be able to get visibility to your exposures, to your cash, to transactions. You need to do so efficiently while you're meeting your capital needs, your liquidity management needs, in a time frame where there's increased complexity around the operations. You're in more countries. The increasing globalization is challenging your access to data, your access to transactions, and having to solve a lot more problems. It's not 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. It's now 5 times 15 times 6. And those might be systems, number of banks you're dealing with, countries you're operating in, data sources you have to connect to. And so the complexity grows a lot, and the expectations have also grown. So a treasury management system can help by solving the issues of, now I can rapidly gather the information so I have quick visibility. Now I'm into self-discovery or self-service discovery, where I can ask other questions. I can use tools to make a better forecast. I can leverage some machine learning to do that. So now I'm controlling a more powerful tool that lets me get more done more accurately. So whether it's getting rid of tasks that are a pain, like connecting, or creating accounting entries when I can build logic-driven rules, this helps free up time, get better insight, allows our group to do more self-discovery, more analysis, and work on some of those other items that aren't available to be automated.
What is happening with the market for TMS?
This is if you're a treasury management system vendor, this is a good time. You've got a good 4 or 5 years, or maybe as many as 7 good years of growth. Why is that? We look and we think in the next 2 years there's going to be a 35% growth in the space of people implementing technology, or at least that's their plans. Even if it comes in at 60% of that, 70% of that, still there'll be a lot of new systems coming to play. But that's the broader concept of the what's happening with the market. The other aspect is that the tech is improving greatly, and that's exciting because it allows for, and you've probably heard me say this too many times before, the democratization of the tech. In other words, it's now available farther downstream in terms of company size. So a small company may be just as complex as one that's 25 billion, but maybe they're only 250 million. Well, now the price point for the capabilities they need is significantly less. It's not out of reach anymore. And so it's available to more people. So there's a big expansion in the tech to smaller companies. I also think it's worth noting that those companies that are using homegrown systems or are using very old installed solutions, there's a lot of firms shifting and returning and moving to a SaaS or cloud-based solution to step up the level. And there's some things going on with technology, but I'm pretty sure you've got other questions on the tech front coming up later.
I do. What are some types of treasury management systems and how have they changed over time?
By types, I assume you're meaning like how are they hosted or maybe their focus. Yeah. So some of the hosting methods. So there's the homegrown systems where companies have built their own system for doing treasury. This is really common in the non-bank financial space, particularly insurance companies. And a lot of these systems are 2 decades old or older. So those were systems built for very treasury intensive groups when solutions didn't exist to meet their needs. Well, now there's a lot of good solutions that can address their complex needs pretty well. And so those are, that's one type. The other is the installed solution. So this is built by a TMS vendor. It's installed on site on your own hardware. It's a single instance. You can choose to do your upgrades or not. And this is similar to the hosted model where it might be installed software, but you install it with a hardware provider. It could be the vendor, could be somewhere else. So you don't have to worry about managing the hardware. You've eliminated that part of the headache. Those are the 3 original type systems. The SaaS and cloud have been around pretty heavily since around 2000. So we're 2 decades in. And this has taken over the cash and the simpler end of the market very handily, really by between 2004, 2005. They took over that into the market as you moved up with more risk. More sales were happening by 2007. And pretty much nearly all new sales are happening in the SaaS or cloud-based space. So it's changed over time from being installed to a lot of distrust about cloud to most IT groups are like, you've got to do this in the cloud. We can't support the other activity, and we'll leverage, some of our federation activities like single sign-on to, link into our controls.
Let's take a look at the security components. What are the components and how does this process work?
Well, I'll address that from a company side first, just highlighting 4 areas. So we've talked about the perimeter, the firewall, the outside of the company, the digital outside, the interior, how you manage movement within the organization. So the principle of least privilege by ID, by directory, by function. There's elements there where companies keep things safe. There's the processes, the controls around the process, how you ensure function is assigned, it's segregated, access is limited based on functionality, need to know. So the principle of least privilege and segregation of duties fit into that. And then finally, the other security component is the human element or the people side. So, when you look at the components, all of those have to work together for security. And I'm glad you asked that because I know we have a section on security within the problems and the solution. We talk about increasing fraud and the need for consistency and scalability. And this is a significant issue because treasury systems help move funds. Criminal organizations are targeting companies, and if they can't convince you to send money out, they will try to access your system or where you store files and move money out of your organization. And so the security components are important for treasury in every area, but certainly so with regard to the payment processes.
Who needs a TMS? Is there a checklist for this?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a checklist, but there's a few indicators. If you asked me this, what were the characteristics of people who would use a TMS 15 years ago? It would be mostly companies that were 2 to 3 billion and above because of the cost and the effort. Certainly 20 years ago would be in the 4 billion and up type space. Now the dollar value or the revenue the revenue of an organization is not nearly as indicative of what companies need it, because that's only one measure of complexity. So complexity is a key driver. The cost to run these systems is increasingly affordable, and there's a continuing value on what you're getting. The value of these systems grows each year rather than diminishes because of the type of tech that's used, how it's developed, how you're always forced to stay current. And so this is really, really significant. So that's a hard answer. It's most companies, if you're over 250 million, this is something you should look at. I know there's a number of factors that would tie into whether you would have a system and what type of system you would use. So someone who's $100 million or $200 million in revenue, maybe even within a single country, may still benefit greatly from a TMS, but it might be a different system than someone who's 20 billion in 50 countries. So there's a range of solutions that can fit. So I guess I didn't really answer your question.
Craig, can we talk a little bit about what exactly a TMS, what does it do? What does it provide?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't think you'll let me get away with saying read the report, download and read the report. But let me talk about it for a few areas. So, what's core to a TMS? A TMS will give you visibility to where's my cash, and what we mean by that is where's my cash by bank account, by currency, by country, by bank. So I can see balances and I can see transactions. It lets me manage at least my short-term liquidity. What is my cash position and what's my forecast? My position is my 0-day forecast. What do I have happening today? What do I expect it to be at the end of the day? So I know where I stand. And then I have a forecast. I can see what my expectations are by day or by week going out a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, so that I know when I need to puddle up investment activity, have that mature so that it's available to fill in a hole that's coming up later. It allows me to target, borrowings, to see when I'm going to be rich with cash and I don't need to borrow for as long. So it's a great tool for looking at those. It also will typically manage some type of debt and investment tracking, and that'll be integrated to the cash position and forecast. And there'll always be some sort of treasury payments with it. So this allows me to move money for concentration purposes. I can wire, I can make book entries through a single portal. Now there's certainly a big difference in terms of how much can be done and what can go on, but those are some of the core elements. The others that I would talk about as it's not really a TMS if you can't do any accounting with it. In other words, you should be able to create accounting entries based upon rules or logic-driven rules so that all the activity flowing through now can be automatically recorded, or most of it can be recorded and fed to the GL. And then finally, more and more, some aspects of bank relationship management are finding their way into the TMS. So bank account activity can be set up in there. So those are some of the core areas. And then certainly there's a range of capabilities around risk management, whether it's FX risk management, commodity price volatility, interest rate, counterparty risk management. There's a number of items there that as you move up and down the complexity scale, there's different capabilities there. But I can see my funds and needs going out into the future. I can account for them. I can manage my bank accounts. Those are some of the core areas.
Oh, what a great resource. Let's talk a little bit about making the business case for a TMS. What's the best approach to get a buy-in on your project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know we have at least one podcast on that topic, and there's some good information in the report. I'm not trying to shamelessly plug it, but there's a couple elements. So when we think about making the business case, this is the broader business case as opposed to just the financial aspect of it. So one thing I would say is, standard of good corporate conduct for most organizations, once you reach a certain size, you're going to use a system, a tool that most people use because there's significant value in it. It's like, how do you make a business case for a general ledger system or an accounting system? And you almost stop and say, why do I need to make a business case for that? I have to record my activity. It would be foolish not to. And you don't need to make a business case for using double entry accounting because that's pretty much a standard. The point there is that this is a tool for managing your most liquid asset and managing some of these key risks, and using automated tools to help that is really part of the a requirement for efficient treasury groups, activity, and decisions. And so with that is, the question is not so much should you have a TMS, but that's the selection process and the business cases, which one might be appropriate for your organization, I think is key. So there's a strategic element, and then there are certainly ways to make the financial business case for that, and that's fairly involved. But it's a standard of good corporate conduct is a key reason for organizations.
Let's talk a little bit about leading practices and implementation. How do you choose a solution that is a win-win?
Yeah, so I think choosing a solution that's a win-win. We spend some time talking about the selection process and looking at what it takes to implement a system, the customer care and feedback. I'll just say a few things about this. So these are some broad guidelines, notably broad, intentionally broad. One is, are you getting a system that's growing in value and working with a company that's focused on the space? Is this the only activity or the core activity, or is this item number 6 on the touch tone phone when you dial in? I think it's very important that it's an area of focus. You want to use a system that's growing in value, a system that the vendor is pouring a lot of money into R&D and continuing to develop it so that every 3 months, every 6 months, the value of the system is increased for you. And that's related, the growing in value is growing in capabilities without complexity. So there's more features that are available, but it's not increasing in complexity unless you have to use those and you're deploying other components. I think the other, in terms of a win-win, is how are they connecting? So that's the question of a network. How are they connecting to other systems? Are they using APIs and they have their own partner ecosystem, which helps you trade FX or invest short-term funds? How are they working in the connectivity area to make sure you can connect to your banks for information, to connect to your banks to make payments, to connect to internal data sources on the inbound side for forecasting, on the outbound side for maybe pushing data out to your BI tool, pushing it to your data lake so you can do additional analysis that may go beyond just what's in the TMS system. So those are a couple elements that touch on what you asked.
Are there any common pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, I think a couple of the biggest pitfalls are just being, too aggressive and saying we're going to implement everything in a really, really short period of time when it's very complex. You're not staffed to do all of that at once. So that's one piece. So make sure you have a reasonable time frame and you get resources that you need to do it. Another pitfall, and there's some listed in the book, and there's another podcast as well. But the other aspect is not getting all your connections stood up quickly and early. You may be connecting to 20 banks, and you go through the process, and you get trained on it, and then you start connecting to your banks. Well, you need data flowing in. This is the fuel for the fire is bank information coming in. So you need to make sure those are planned for early in the process. I think those are a couple of the pitfalls that can easily be avoided by thinking ahead and making sure that you may be aggressive, but you're realistic, and you're realistic with the resources you have. The fact that most people have a full-time job, and now you're going to layer in something that's going to take multiple people to implement until you get things stood up. So those are a couple.
Thank you. Craig, thanks for sharing your wealth of knowledge. This has been an insightful overview on treasury and risk management systems. How can our listeners get a copy of the Analyst Report series?
Yeah, that's great. So the Analyst Report series is now available by individual report or for all of them. And you can get this by going to strategictreasure.com/ARS for Analyst Report series. And you can download those Analyst Reports today for free. It's just a simple intake form. I think you get the digital copies very quickly. So certainly worth logging in and getting that information.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update Podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.